In chapter 1130 of One Piece, we are finally introduced to the accursed prince Loki, the shame of Elbaf and the self-proclaimed sun god who will destroy the land of Elbaf.
And between his appearance and the legend that's just been built around him over time, there's little doubt that Loki will have an immense impact on the coming narrative and likely the One Piece world at large. But before we can get to know Prince Loki any better, we wanted to take the chance to look at what we know about him already, as well as speculate what else we may learn based on some of Loki's existing lore.
So we'll first start with what we know so far. Based on what we've heard and when we've heard his name throughout the story, and I'm going to put it in chronological order just to make it a bit easier to follow. So we'll start 63 years ago, during the Winter Solstice Festival, back in Big Mom's flashback, as they were all gathering around to eat semla, and they announced that they were going to be celebrating in commemoration of the new prince being born, Prince Loki being born, actually right around the same time as Road in the story, interestingly enough.
Yeah, and from there, it's not until he's 23 that we hear him mentioned at all again, and that's when he became infatuated with Lola, even despite Elbaf's general hatred for Lola's mother, Big Mom, where he did ultimately propose to her, although it was obviously declined.
And at the time, the marriage was considered a great chance by Big Mom for Elbaf to forgive her for what she had done in her childhood, and it seemed like that was mostly due to their respect for their prince, which demonstrated that the moniker of the shame of Elbaf and viewing him as the accursed prince was not really always applicable in the eyes of his people.
Yeah, and we can also maybe infer that this means that Loki genuinely fell for Lola's personality, considering he rejected the chance to marry her twin in her stead when she ran from the proposal. It really had to be her.
Yeah, no, he was, for somebody who's this giant, almost Doflamingo-looking-esque man, he does seem though he has some soft spots, and one of them was definitely for Lola. But after that, we don't hear much from this prince whatsoever in his life up until what we learned in this chapter about somewhere between that rejection and in the next 40 years, Loki became much more power hungry and reportedly murdered his own father, King Harold, in order to get the devil fruit that had been passed down through his family from one generation to the next.
Yeah, which also likely means that it would have been inherited by his older brother Harudin, but because of this action, it took all of Elbaf's warriors to gather together and carry out his punishment and keep him from fleeing the land.
And while Loki did manage to escape the punishment they were trying to give him being crucifixion, he was eventually caught and chained to the base of the great tree Yggdrasil, where he still resides today, and where he has just met the one and only Straw Hat Luffy.
Yeah, and as for the future of this prince and what he may bring to the story going forward, in his own words, he sees himself as the sun god who will bring about the end of the world.
But that's all we know so far, based on the very sparse information and rumors mostly that we've heard about this character. As to how much of it is going to be factual and whether or not he will truly be the end of Elbaf and maybe more of the One Piece world, we really don't know. So the only way that we feel like would be appropriate for predicting the way Loki's story will play out is to look at the lore that might have inspired his characters from different Norse legends and tales, just to see how Loki's character is portrayed and how his story may play out in the end.
Exactly. So, starting with some speculation on what exactly his role was within Norse mythology, he's chiefly known as the god of mischief across most records and fables, and is what would be considered a thorn in the side of the regular gods frequently.
Absolutely. While not born from the gods themselves, instead being born to the Jotun or the giants, the frost giants in Jotunheim, he is often referred to as a god, but not one of the Aesir class, one of the ruling class like Thor and Odin, the gods that live in Asgard and make all the decisions for the 9 realms. But more often than not, he is scheming, he is misleading, and in one particular instance was also straight up held accountable for one of the deaths of the gods being Balder. But he also just convinced his brother to stab him with a spear, and the gods were not always as smart as they like to think. So, it wouldn't be too unreasonable, though, to assume the One Piece Loki would also have committed something similar as a grave sin like patricide, as the giant warrior pirates have told the rest of the crew about.
And going off of that idea further, we want to look at what Loki's relationship in Norse mythology he has with his father and brother, as it very clearly plays a direct part in his role within One Piece. And while Loki and Harudin do seem to be biological brothers, in the legends themselves, Loki actually has no direct relation to Odin or Thor like most may believe.
Definitely not in a biological sense. Loki does seem to share a sort of blood brother relation with both Thor and Odin due to a pact of loyalty they've made to one another, which is actually why they often assist and kind of travel together on many of Thor's journeys. However, despite this pact, his offspring and his actions are the ultimate impetus for Ragnarok, which pits him against his blood brothers in Odin and Thor in the final battle. So, once more, the concept of turning on his once loved family, or maybe even somebody he might have looked up to before, for his own ambitions, doesn't really seem out of the question for this One Piece's Loki either, especially if the rumors we've heard are true.
Yeah, and moving on to what I think is definitely going to be the most intriguing part of this conversation, and is much more open to interpretation. What sort of power could Loki have stolen from his father based off of the powers that he had within Norse mythology?
And starting with each of the classifications, we'll start with paramecia, just because that's the most wide and open concept. But it would seem unbefitting if Loki didn't have a shape-shifting devil fruit of some sort. Being the trickster god, always morphing into different animals in order to court other gods and beings like that. But unfortunately, we've seen that power before. At least twice.
Yeah, I mean, we were discussing that a little bit. Both Mr. 2 and Katarina Devon in the story have that exact power where they just have to come in contact with someone and they can take on their form. Those also, though, have some physical prerequisites. So maybe it could be the aptitude of transforming into more vicious beasts, possibly without even having to come into contact, just generally being able to morph into a different form.
That would be sick, like a Beast Boy kind of transformation fruit, where you can just think about it and do it immediately. That would definitely be broken.
And that could have a little more sun god-esque qualities, where it's a little more just based on the freedom of the imagination.
Absolutely. I think that would be a super cool fruit to see them work with, especially with Oda's creativity. But looking at Logia, I think this one might be a bit of the hardest to classify. While Loki himself is often called the god of fire, which is befitting of somebody proclaiming themselves to be a sun god, I don't think that having a fire fruit, especially considering the Maramara fruit that already exists, and Akainu's Magu Magu no Mi, I think we've had enough fire fruits in here. Harudin was even fighting for the Maramara no Mi in the Colosseum.
Yeah, and while he was doing that, he stated, have you ever seen a giant with a Logia devil fruit before? So it seems like if he would have seen one, you know, he would already have that to base it off of. This sounds like something that it likely wouldn't be tied to.
But just for a fun idea, the idea of being a frost giant from Jotunheim, having some sort of frost or even a Bifrost ability would be a pretty cool, interesting spin on it, especially tied to this land. Something similar maybe to Kuzan's fruit with an even elevated level of power. However, it doesn't seem too likely, so let's turn our focus to Zone in what I think is probably the most likely of the options, considering the way the power scaling towards mythical zones has gone towards the end of the story here.
Yeah, it's definitely started to pop up more and more as the most important and powerful to the overall story. And as you already stated, Loki is well known for shape-shifting into all sorts of creatures, as well as fathering a number of different species of children, the most synonymous of which is likely Jormungandr, the world serpent, and Fenrir, the wolf who eventually kills Odin during Ragnarok.
And I do think it might be a bit similar to, like, Yamato has the devil fruit for a wolf already, but that is kind of a legend that's definitely more associated with the lore of Japan. And the Fenrir wolf has its own distinct look, it has its own story, and having a wolf form that is well known for killing a fatherly figure after you've murdered your father to do it seems pretty on the nose, but I think it would be a pretty fitting and pretty awesome devil fruit, honestly, to see how they could portray that, especially because he's literally chained up next to all of those other Fenrir wolves in the mountain range at the base of the tree. Like,
and that could maybe even give him like control over those Fenrir wolves, that then they would all be able to do his bidding, and that could help him take over and destroy Elbaf.
I think that would probably be the most interesting route to go, but I want to hear what you guys think, so let us know in the comments below what you think the devil fruit that he killed his own father to get would have been. And we are going to move instead to probably our shortest part of this question, because I put in initially, I wanted to get the speculation, is Loki being imprisoned correctly, or is there more to the story?
See, I don't see it as possible that all of the giants are like misreading this guy. He murdered his dad, he went against Harudin and his people, and he stated very bluntly he wants to end the world. I think it's pretty logical to say they were correct in locking him up. He's not a good dude.
Yeah, and in mythology, Loki himself definitely doesn't do any favors to clear up the story either. While the eventual legacy of Ragnarok does reform the world in a somewhat positive way, it still does destroy all of the 9 realms, most of the life within it, almost all of the gods, and Loki consistently is leading the forces against the gods in that fight. So while he was imprisoned on murdering a different god, which he was also most definitely guilty for, he just definitely doesn't seem to be doing his favor to clear up his name in any good way.
No, definitely not. And if he were going to, it would have to be something that he has definitely yet to do. I feel like everything to this point, he belongs there.
So we'll instead look at what will happen when those chains come off. Because while it took Ragnarok in the actual legend for those chains to come undone, luckily for the Accursed Prince, he has our idiot captain right in front of him.
Yeah, and no one else there to stop him, so it really does seem more likely than you would like that he very well could be on his way out much sooner than later. And in most accounts in Norse mythology, when Loki is released from his captivity and his chains, he leads monsters and giants, including many of his own children, in the war that results in the destruction of the gods and most of the 9 realms. So, again, it would seem that his promise to Luffy and the warning that the giant warrior pirates gave carries a lot of truth.
Although, the idea of all-out war on this gigantic island between all of the warriors of Elbaf against this one prince and all of these beasts at his side, whatever monsters and creatures there are, especially because it seems like most people on this island have animal familiars, and just having the tiny dots of the Straw Hats be in the middle of that chaos.
And then there's also the fact that he's basically chained to the tree itself. So, hey, I've got a bad feeling how he would act with that right off the bat.
Yeah.
Of going against his land.
But let's take one more look at how Loki's story might end. Because if he's freed from that tree and leads all-out war, people are going to die. And eventually that might end up being Loki himself, especially considering in the legend of Ragnarok, when leading the forces against Asgard, Loki does perish in battle in a fight one-on-one against Heimdall, who's the guardian of Asgard. Both combatants meet their end, concluding a very long-standing feud between Loki and the Aesir in a very violent way. So perhaps Loki will be freed. Perhaps he will lead a war that destroys most of his homeland. But more importantly, maybe Luffy or Harudin or even Usopp will kill Loki.
See, of those 3, I mean, I love all 3, especially Usopp, but I would lean Harudin especially when you consider Dorian Bragi saying that he was left there to protect Elbaf from trouble, and the trouble was Loki. So, and he's the older brother who's the rightful prince. I would not be surprised if this is his like coming to moment and like really earning his right as the king.
That would be an awesome storytelling angle to come at it from. I'm interested to see, even if they do kill him, will it be enough, or will he have already destroyed Elbaf so much that they can't even live there anymore? Because that would be also very fitting with the legend.
Then they can join their king in the fleet.
Yeah, bring on all the giant warriors. So there's a rundown of everything we know about the Accursed Prince Loki from both the One Piece story and the Norse legends themselves. Please let us know what you guys think Loki's Devil Fruit ability may be in the comments below, because I'm sure you guys have some awesome ideas for what that might be. Like the video if you enjoyed this discussion, subscribe for more One Piece based content like this, and don't forget,
Be crew!